I want to start today's lesson by finishing up our discussion about BATNA. If you remember, BATNA stands for the Best Alternative to Negotiated Agreement, or as I like to call it, Plan B. We've already talked about the fact that it's very important going into a negotiation to establish your strongest BATNA, that you have a backup position if you are not able to conclude an agreement, because the stronger your backup agreement, the stronger your negotiating power. Equally important to developing your own BATNA, however, is to understand what the other side's BATNA is. Similarly to your position, the stronger the other side's BATNA, the stronger its power in the negotiation. So it's very important to understand what power position they are coming into the negotiation with. And this is all part of being able to step into the shoes of the party you're negotiating with, to understand their position and to understand their strengths and weaknesses. So, an important part of your preparation, develop your own BATNA, but also figure out what the other side's BATNA is. If the other side has a strong BATNA, you should consider whether it isn't possible for you to change that in some fashion. If you can change the strength of their BATNA, it will increase your negotiating power in the negotiation. Sometimes it's possible to do that, and sometimes it's not. But you should always think about whether it's something you can accomplish. How do we go about changing the other side's BATNA? Because it's not something that's necessarily within our control. There are a couple of things you can do to try to accomplish this. First, sometimes the other side goes into the negotiation believing that their BATNA is stronger than it really is. Remember when we talked about rationality and how people frame? One of the things affecting the rationality is that negotiators tend to believe the outcome of the negotiation is more favorable to them than it really is. So you can explore with them, asking your active listening questions, what they think their alternatives are going to be if you're unable to reach an agreement. And if their alternative is not a realistic one, then you can point out to them the flaws in their thinking. Make them come down to earth a little bit and understand that concluding your agreement is actually more important than they thought, because their BATNA is not as strong as they thought it was. Secondly, sometimes, but not always, we have the opportunity to influence their BATNA, to make it less stronger than it currently is. Unfortunately, a lot of the times the way we go about doing that is through filing a lawsuit, making them know that we have their attention, they have our attention, and they're going to have to deal with us. Let me give you an example of what happened with one of the cases that I had when I was practicing as a lawyer, where we were able to significantly change the other side's BATNA. This was a case where my client was a video distributor and sold videos to video stores when they used to exist. And one of the people who had licensed the right to distribute a video with was someone who had produced a video on how to play the guitar. So that person was the producer of the video. They licensed my client to distribute the video. And my client distributed that video in places like Guitar Center, right, where people were looking for instructional resources on how to learn how to play the guitar. The producer of the videotape had a very huge ego, and he thought that his way of teaching the guitar was so unique and so important that he would have huge sales of this video. And while my client successfully did sell copies of the video, it wasn't nearly at the level that the producer of the video thought it should be. So the producer of the video terminated my client's rights to the license of the video, which under the terms of the license agreement, the producer didn't have the right to do that just because the producer was unhappy with the amount of sales. In order to properly terminate the license agreement, there had to be some wrongdoing on behalf of my client, not just that the other side didn't like the quantity of videos that were being sold. After terminating my client's right, the producer of the video licensed the video to another video distributor. And then the producer audited my client's records. Because as I said, the producer felt video sales should have been far more extensive than what they were. The producer sent in his accountants, who were not experienced auditors, to go through the books and records of my client to reconcile the sales of the videos that have been made and the royalties that have been paid to the producer. And unfortunately, because the accountants were not very experienced, they didn't know how to review participation statements, which are the financial statements produced by a distributor in the music video industry. So they committed malpractice, and their mistake was they added all of the participation statements together, not realizing that the numbers reflected on each statement was a cumulative number. Total sales to date, month after month, total sales to date was reflecting a current running total. And instead, they took every one of those statements and added the numbers together. So the result of their audit was, and they advised their producer client, that my client owed the producer about $600,000 in unpaid royalties. Now, this is what the producer wanted to hear, because this is how he believed how successful and great his video was. So he brought a lawsuit against my client seeking to recover $600,000. When my client received that lawsuit, it realized the mistake that the auditors had made and immediately invited the auditors to come in and sit down with my client's accountants and have the accountant take them through the statements so they could correct the report and see what they had done wrong. And that meeting took place, and my client's accountants were able to point out to the auditors how they had erred, and the auditors corrected the report. And now the report, instead of showing $600,000 of unpaid royalties, showed that my client owed them about $37,000. Now, in fact, that number was still wrong, but the auditors were trying to save some face with their client by at least coming up with some monies that were owed. However, when the producer got that corrected audit report, he ignored it because that wasn't the number he wanted to hear. He believed that the initial audit report showing $600,000 of due royalties was the right one. And so he kept on pursuing his lawsuit. And the problem was, not only did the producer have unrealistic expectations about what was really owed to him, but he had hired his lawyer on a contingency fee basis. For those of you who aren't familiar with that term, that means as the lawsuit is progressing, the producer was not paying his lawyer anything to handle the lawsuit, and he would only have to pay the lawyer if and when the lawyer recovered a favorable judgment. So because his number was unreasonably high, and because he wasn't paying his lawyer, the case just kept on going and going and going. And the legal fees for my client were soon exceeding the number that the auditors in the correct report claimed was due. So at this point in the litigation, this had been handled by another law firm. And at this point in the litigation, the client was very frustrated and came to my firm to ask if we would step into the lawsuit and see what could be done. And the first thing I did when I took over this lawsuit and reviewed it was I realized that the producer's BATNA was totally unrealistic, number one, because he believed the number that was owed him was $600,000. But number two, he didn't have anything to lose by continuing to pursue the lawsuit because he wasn't paying his lawyer anything. As a result of this, I realized that we had to change the producer's BATNA. And the way that we did that is that we came up with a credible legal theory that the new video distributor that the producer had licensed the video to was infringing my client's copyright. And the reason that was the case is because the producer didn't have the legal right to terminate my client's license in the first place. Therefore, my client still had a valid license to be the exclusive distributor of the guitar video. And since we had the exclusive license to be the distributor, when the new company came in and started distributing that video, that company was infringing my client's copyright that it received by the license of the video. So, my client sued the new distributor for copyright infringement. When the new distributor received that lawsuit, it immediately turned around and sued the producer that had licensed it the rights to the video, because when the producer licensed the rights to the new company, the producer represented to the new company that he had the legal right to do so. And since now there was a claim that he did not have the legal right to do so because someone else owned those rights, the new company sued the producer for what's called indemnification. That is to say that whatever the new producer had to pay in attorney's fees or in losses in the lawsuit, it was going to look to the producer to pay. So, when previously the producer had nothing at stake because it wasn't exposed to paying attorney's fees, right? It would only have to pay its attorney if it actually won the lawsuit. Now, the producer had something dramatically at stake. And that was that now the producer was looking at paying the legal fees of the new production company and also paying for any copyright damages if we prevailed at trial. So, a dramatic change to the other side's BATNA, and in fact, it was that new lawsuit that caused this litigation to be resolved relatively soon after that. So, one way you can change another side's BATNA, it's not always desirable to get involved in a lawsuit, but in this case, it definitely paid off for the client to do so. In conclusion, remember when you're negotiating to take into account not only your BATNA, but also the other side's BATNA. Is it realistic? If not, try to change it by making the other side more realistic. Or if it is realistic, is there some way you can lessen the value of their BATNA? In the out-of-class negotiation concerning Toyanda, this issue is going to be at stake. There's going to be a position of one of the parties being able to at least reduce to some extent what the other side believes its BATNA is. So be on the lookout for that as you're conducting your negotiation.